During his time in South France, Vincent van Gogh, born 1853, produced over 2,100 pieces of art. In 1890, Van Gogh sold the Rennes vineyard to fellow painter Anne Bach for 400 francs, roughly $20 today. It was the only time Van Gogh successfully sold a painting in a gallery and received a receipt. Convinced he was a failure and struggling with mental illness, Van Gogh committed suicide later that year. In 2017, one of his paintings, Laborer in the Field, sold for more than $81 million. It seems to have been a characteristic feature of many creative giants throughout the years to have labored in relative obscurity only to be recognized posthumously. Van Gogh, Bach, Kafka, Thoreau, Galileo, Poe, Oscar Wilde, and many more I'm sure I'm missing. All artists who did not live to see the world recognize their work as the masterpieces we now know them as. I don't say this to suggest that I, or any one of us, belong among that order of greats whose work went relatively unknown. I say this as a reminder of how often times are a poor judge of what's timeless. Times are unreliable proxies for determining the value or impact of our art. If they were as human as we are, it's easy to imagine how they, some of the best artists who have ever lived, must have wrestled with the same self-doubts that we still face today. Am I good enough? Am I making any progress or impact at all? Is there any purpose or point to my labors? Will my sacrifices have any significance or make any sort of meaningful difference? Am I being delusional and selfish? We're left to wonder, how did they deal with the world not validating what they were doing? Were they purely intrinsically motivated and immune to doubt, or did they, like Van Gogh, struggle with self-worth and fall sick when they didn't receive acceptance from the world? How would they fare in today's world of social media? All questions that help us understand the lives of the greats are both inspirations and cautionary tales. Inspirational insofar as they could continue in their work regardless of how the world received it. Yet cautionary insofar as they reflect, as with Van Gogh, the dangers of weighing our worth on the scales of external approval, which increasingly depends on the favor of algorithms. But for all this reflection on the motivations of creativity, none of this answers how, whether, and to what extent we ought to be doing it in the first place. For that, we must search elsewhere. This brings us to Paul's letter to the Galatians in the inner dialogue that ensues. Quote, "For if anyone thinks himself to be something, being nothing, he deceives himself. But let each test his own work, and then he will have the ground of boasting in himself alone, and not in another. For each shall bear his own load. Now let the one being taught in the word share in all good things with the one teaching. Do not be misled. God is not mocked. For whatever a man might sow, that also he will reap. For the one sowing to his own flesh, from the flesh he will reap decay. But the one sowing to the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. And we should not grow weary in well-doing, for in due time we will reap a harvest, not giving up." End quote. Galatians 6, 3-9. First line, "If anyone thinks himself to be something, when he is nothing, he deceives himself." This, my friends, is our chief concern, that we, in fact, are nothing, telling ourselves that we're something, and it's time to stop kidding ourselves. It's time to pack it in and return to a life of silence. But then we arrive at the last line, "We should not grow weary in well-doing, for in due time we will reap a harvest, not giving up." Unlike the first line, this last line encourages us to endure in our efforts. Maybe the voice that wants us to stand down is the voice of resistance. Quote, "So does my weary courage surge again, and such sweet boldness rushed into my heart, turned me to our first intention. Go." Dante, Inferno. Caught between these two competing forces, our spirit grows drained. We turn our hearts to the eternal and ask, which is it? Do we side with the first voice or the second? Do we abandon our creative projects or continue? Answer, both and neither. The first line is right to the extent that it is a recognition that we, as in the ego, are indeed nothing, as he is everything. It is right to convict us of selfishness on occasion and put us back in our place. If we are doing this whole thing right, nothing we do as a creative comes from us. To do something for personal attention is to betray the muse we are to obey, and to desire recognition or approval for something that does not originate with us is to desire credit for something not of our doing. In that respect, The words of the first are right. It is only the voice in our head that reads in the extra suggestions that we have no talents or treasures or sharing where this line goes wrong. The last line is right to the extent that what we are doing is well-doing and sowing to the spirit rather than to the flesh. To the extent we sow to our flesh will reap decay and failure is inevitable. To the extent we sow to the spirit, failure is impossible and success inevitable. It all rests on sitting with ourselves and honestly asking whether we channel what wants to move through us or allow our egos to obstruct the flow. As long as we can be still and know we are serving the spirit, we can know all suggestions of abandonment come from that eternal anti-spirit that exists to deny all creative efforts. It is the spirit called resistance and screw tape. Its best work is taking virtues and twisting them into vices. Here, we are reminded that humility is a virtue, timidity is an illness. Whenever we find ourselves fighting the force that negates, we can return to something like Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis in an effort to know our enemy. On the topic of current creative weariness, Screwtape's words to Wormwood on how to exploit fatigue in his efforts to win human souls for hell are particularly instructive. Quote, "Whatever he says, let his inner resolution be not to bear whatever comes to him, but to bear it for a reasonable period. And let the reasonable period be shorter than the trial is likely to last. It need not be much shorter. In attacks on patience, chastity, and fortitude, the fun is to make the man yield just when, had he not but known it, relief was almost in sight." End quote. C.S. Lewis, Screw Tape Letters. So there you have it, my friends. My message to you is a message to me. So, to the Spirit, create for eternity. In those efforts, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil in the Lord is not in vain. End quote. Be unyielding. Spring is coming.